It takes considerable talent to turn yourself into a Love is Blind villain without ever even leaving the pods. But guys, we did it this season. But in one of the most awful breakups I've ever seen on this show, and get used to saying this because this is one of the worst seasons ever, Kacie manages to pull this off and really harm one of the few Asian contestants that actually got screen time. Now, you might be asking yourself, why do other people care about this? And what does this have to do with protecting your self-confidence while you're dating in America? This all brings to mind the saying, the house always wins. Production is the house. Whether you betray the thesis of the show, which is love is blind and good people will find that in here, or you go through that and you actually do have a marriage at the end, they still look good. You look bad. And this breakup is wrapped up into something that we, the audience, don't like to admit, that these so-called superficial things that we hold on to when we're assessing our relationships are actually tied into some very serious conditions and beliefs we have about our social status and how we want our dating and our partners to help affirm that. So yes, you could call this a story about a pod experiment that went wrong, but it's really about how anxiety and insecurity can blow up the things you want, or the things you say you want. In this case, it stopped two people from getting what they really needed to have what they said they have been missing in their other relationships. So let's set the scene. We have Kacie. She's a former Mormon, she is conventionally attractive, and she is trying to get away from the types of toxic relationships she has typically spent her time in. We find out that in the past, she has prioritized finding other conventionally attractive men, and even in her last relationship, slid into the DMs of a gorgeous man she found on TikTok. We come to discover that this ex was someone she was proud to be seen with. She enjoyed him physically, but emotionally, it was just very lacking. She felt kind of empty, and in her words, there was always another hot blonde on the horizon. She had watched this guy, and she didn't feel secure in the relationship. But that anxiety and insecurity, it is not just around that last toxic relationship. We sense in her confessionals this is something she still struggles with, at least in the edit. As we follow her along, we notice that in times of doubt or fear or insecurity, she tends to offer herself up sexually or sensually. There's this leading with the physicality to soothe her own tension or doubt. We also get this very strong vibe that she understands that this is mainly what she has to offer men. Unfortunately, in this society, you're also competing against AI, social media, and worse, young girls. If your sensuality and your attractiveness is your main offer, you will be anxious for the rest of your life. And American women are operating in a culture that sees women's bodies as a depreciating asset. Unlike other cultures, time and experience don't add to American women's sexuality. We tend to choose and perform a performance of youth, the childlike, sexy baby vibe. Americans have fetishized a certain performance of innocence. Now, this is not just a story about a breakup, it's a story about the myth of natural preferences. We have an internet full of people defending that their particular preference is neutral. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about attraction to gender. I am talking about an attraction to a certain sexual performance. Sexual scripts, they are influenced by our society, and they have to be learned. We are told that this happens in a vacuum, and that if a 65-year-old man finds a 12-year-old girl attractive, it's because that's natural. This is how you have people saying that they just don't find Asians attractive. It's how you have white men thinking that dating Asian women is a gateway to a monolithic sexual experience. On reality TV shows, we tend to reinforce tropes, not interrogate them. But there's always an opportunity that a trope will be exploded. That did not happen here. The ironic thing is that both Kacie and the Asian Colorado bro Patrick have come to Love is Blind for the same reasons. They share a kind of insecurity about their looks. Now, there are very different reasons for why they feel shame about their sexualities and their looks. And here they have this opportunity to embrace the process and try to break out of that. Spoiler alert, they do not try. Patrick is the son of Chinese Cambodian immigrants. He is deeply insecure, and he carries around this trauma of what it was like to be the only Asian ever all the time. And guess what happens when you grow up in America? You grow up with a culture that has a not so great relationship with Asian masculinity. And that history is just as anxious as he is. The emasculation and the alienation of Asian men in this country is part of a generational campaign through media to make people not connect to these men. Stripping Asian men of their masculinity was a way to protect white supremacy, because what happened is that in the 1800s, you started to have these South Chinese immigrants come in. And guess what? This was happening on the West Coast with railroads, and it was also happening in the South because there was this need to replace the enslaved labor. A decent chunk of Asian immigrants were able to successfully get through the white supremacist system and make money, and some of them were looking for wives. this was problematic because white supremacy was not created because of backwards ideas about race. White supremacy was created to protect capital. And now you have these Asian men who have capital that they can offer to white women. So what did white supremacy do? Well, what it always does, it looks at a financial reality and then it creates a fictional racial reality to protect that ongoing financial one. Asian men were part of a threat to the legal American apartheid that was going on. So they passed laws and they lied about who Asian men were. We continue to have ongoing prejudices and biases against Asian men because Americans don't want to admit that that legal apartheid happened or why it happened. Or maybe they want to say if they do admit it happened, it wasn't that bad. So men like Patrick grow up feeling less than and they don't even know why, and they tend to internalize that it's something wrong with them. Patrick eventually spills and opens up about these macro aggressions that have affected his life and really hurt him. And it seems that he admits to Kacie what his ethnicity is under great duress and insecurity. Patrick also still seems to think that him being Asian is a massive hurdle for most women. Both Patrick and Kacie are suffering under false, damaging social narratives. One about being a woman, being a white woman, and one about being a man, an Asian man. They, however, paper this over in their relationship time instead of actually dealing with it and taking the opportunity that is there in the pods. They share each other's stories, but the way that they hype each other up and say it's going to be okay is by them just saying they're both attractive. Patrick is asked by production to specifically spell out what he's talking about when he says he just matches Kacie in so many ways. He can't think of one. Kacie is gushing about how much she loves him and she loves him as a person and how she knows him, but so much of her talk is about how hot he's going to be, how cute their kids are going to look, and how much fun they're going to have together sexually. And that's a whole other video on their discussion of mixies and her siblings' dating preferences. This connection is still deeply based on them assuaging their pain and their insecurities through white acceptance. Patrick is getting her white acceptance and Kacie is getting his acceptance as a beautiful white girl. Love cannot be blind to people who prioritize this sort of thing in a relationship. It's this level of affirmation that has to be met through society and yourself thinking that that person is indeed hot. There has to be conventional attractiveness there for this to be considered successful. So it's no surprise that when we meet, we see all the hallmarks of what happens when one person is not that thrilled with how the other person looks. We've been watching this show for a while. We're getting hip with it. They don't have what they need for this to be a relationship that could eventually become emotionally or socially fulfilling for them. Patrick is happy because he gets his white pretty princess. Again, there's a whole other video on how he and the other men talk about his other strong initial frontrunner who is an Asian woman. We can tell that Kacie is nervous. She fixates on her ring. She gets very physical with him very quickly. Kacie was absolutely open to marrying and being with an Asian man. He needed to be a conventionally hot Asian man. We see that she barely looks back when they're leaving each other and rushes off. She doesn't stay to wave goodbye like some of the other people who can't believe their luck. She's out of there, but Patrick has every reason to believe that she's good with him because she was so kissy. It's not a crime for Kacie to not be attracted to Patrick. But here's the problem. She then sits down and does 2 confessional interviews with production where she's very clearly and calmly stating, and carefully, that, look, she just doesn't see the attraction growing. He deserves someone who's obsessed with him, and that's not her. She just can't get there with him. She's clear that it's not fair to lead him on like that, and she can't take him to Baja. And she's aware of how bad this looks. So the reasonable, mature thing to do next is to level it with him and break it off. Instead, she calls this meeting with Patrick where she starts and stops. She's sobbing, she's clinging to him, she's kissing him. She tells him how much she loves him and just that she can't do the TV show thing anymore. She says she doesn't want to break his heart, and Patrick's like, but you're not breaking my heart unless you're breaking up with me. And he asks her, are you breaking up with me? And she does not confirm. She gives these weak outs to herself. How will he find her? Will he get her number? She doesn't know. He's like, well, we'll go home together. And she's like, no, I need to go alone. And he's like, what? When he presses, she doesn't own it. And so we have this whole climbing him like a tree, running back to him, jumping into his arms, kissing him, and telling him how much she loves him. Obviously, Kacie didn't want to crush him. She knew it would crush him based off of everything he shared with her. She didn't want to say, I'm not attracted to you. But people deserve honesty, and you were honest to the cameras. Cruelty is not in that she doesn't find him attractive. It's that she doesn't tell him that. She is going to allow him to go home, watch this back, and become the laughingstock of a bunch of people watching this. She cared more about saving herself as looking superficial than caring for him. This is leaving a mess for Patrick to have to deal with later. And she does end up playing right into a storyline that continues to fail Asian men. She did not protect protect him, she just protected herself. And that's not love. Am I saying she's a raging racist? No. But I am saying that she turned to a specific white girl script to get herself out of the mess she created. Tears, kisses, baby voice. This particular form of whiteness has once again betrayed Patrick.